probably one of the differences between me and maybe your typical bank economist is that I've been working in property. So I didn't start in economics, I started in property.
Welcome to Get Invested on the Property Hub podcast channel, the leading weekly show to help you unlock your full self, health and wealth potential. I'm your host, Bushy Martin, and each week I go deep with the best investors, experts, leaders and founders to find out what it takes to break free from the grind, discover freedom and live by design. Subscribe now and join me and get invested in the life you really want. Let's get started. Hi, freedom fighters. How much do you want and need certainty? And how do you make sense of the world? In our times of exponential change, rapidly growing complexity and endless information, it seems we all crave for increasing levels of certainty in order to feel safe and secure about the future. So the greater the level of change, the higher the level of certainty we seem to desire. Now, throughout millennia of evolution, humans have managed to survive and thrive by creating simple mental models and frameworks that have become almost intuitive in order to scan and filter the never-ending stream of information that bombards all of our senses. And this allows us to focus on those that are critical to anticipating what's likely to happen and to make the decisions and actions necessary to allow us to survive and prosper as a race. And this has led our subconscious minds to develop perceptual and behavioural biases that almost invisibly guide our thoughts and emotional responses. All of this to help us anticipate the future in order to make good, quick decisions that reinforce our innate need to feel safe and secure through the sense of certainty that this entails. But certainty has never been more under threat with the escalating rate of change in a constantly connected world where the only certainty is more uncertainty. So how do we make sense of this dynamic complexity and continue to safely navigate it? In recent times, the perception of certainty, or might I say misconception, is being offered by an increasing reliance on big data. But is this a panacea or a Pandora's box? And nowhere is this more evident than in the world of property, where every conceivable measurable is being captured in order to justify property decisions. But property conditions and movements are as much about the intangible as they are the tangible, because our behaviours are driven more by our subconscious emotions and our baked-in biases than they are by our rational logic, which is often used to post-justify the decisions that our subliminal subconscious mind has already made. And applying simple apples for apples commodity market metrics and comparisons to housing and property assets may make for good media, but every home and every street and every suburb is different from every other of the 11 million odd properties in over 15,000 odd suburbs right across the country. So the notion of property markets and a reliance on single correlated cause and effect metrics are a bit of an anathema to me when we're actually comparing an apple with every other known fruit and vegetable. Yes, they appeal to our need for certainty by creating simple mind models, as they may actually work for a period, but they're unlikely to stand the test of time because the simplification misses or overlooks many elements of the associated dynamic complexity, but they increasingly drive sentiment, which is having a growing impact on property decisions. So instead of becoming preoccupied with forecasting the future and trying to pick tops and bottoms that are actually never known until after the event, I've always played the long game over 15 years or more with patience and persistence and planned for the worst and expected the best by focusing on the consistent underlying fundamentals and mitigating the unknown and uncontrollable risks by just having healthy rainy day reserves. And what's helped with this understanding of the world and its impact on you and property? Quite simply, it's by appreciating economics. And before your mind shuts down because of the negative associations you may attribute with the boring and apparently irrelevant economic jargon that you hear in the sound bites on the nightly news, I'm talking about economics in the context of understanding scarcity by studying how we use resources and respond to incentives, as well as a study of decision-making and behavioural economics. Because in reality, economics is a very broad discipline that helps us understand historical trends, interpret the headlines, and make much better informed predictions about what's likely to happen
in order to address our world's most important issues from the macro to the micro, right down to the micro. And while a lot of economists sadly get somewhat of a bad rap because forecasting the future and explaining it is in easily comprehensible terms is about as easy and accurate as predicting the weather, given the level of variable dynamic complexity. Good economics helps you to better understand our world and help us to make better informed decisions so that we can invest our time, energy, and money much more wisely. So today we're joined by one of those good economists, Dr. Cameron Murray, who's an author who brings fresh economic thinking into this often staid rationalist industry. As you're about to hear over the next two episodes, as we first unpack his personal journey and philosophies before deep diving into the world of economics next week, Cameron specialises in property and housing, environmental economics, and corruption, which really spikes my curiosity. And he also dabbles in just about everything else from macro to money to institutions to evolutionary economics and much more. So welcome, and let's get invested, Cameron.
Thanks for having me, Bushy.
Cameron, I'm really looking forward to this exercise. As I guess already outlined, economics, I think, gets a pretty bad rap in Australia generally, but in property in particular. So to sort of kick things off and really draw the line in the sand there, can you sort of run us through what you do differently and why you do what you do, Cameron?
Yeah, I think probably one of the differences between me and maybe your typical bank economist is that I've been working in property. So I didn't start in economics, I started in property. If you can believe it, I tried to sell real estate for a while, thinking that there was easy money to be had. Got my real estate agent's license and was the world's worst real estate agent for a year. And realized that actually the interesting part is not selling for people. The interesting part is the investment and the market and the details of property as an asset. And so I ended up doing a valuation property economics degree and ended up working in a listed property development company for a while. And so that was sort of my transition. At the same time, I was investing in property personally. So unlike your typical economist, I start with the sort of practical on the ground. And as you said in the introduction, every property is unique. And so, yeah, it's great to have these metrics, but you can still outperform the market with the right property, with the right local conditions. And so I was very aware of that. And so I guess what I do differently is my perspective is a little bit deeper in terms of those details. And then I try and bring the big and powerful economic concepts to those practical details that I've experienced, rather than just sort of sticking with my head in the clouds with these high-level concepts, which can be powerful, but if you've missed a key detail, might send you down the wrong path. So that's probably where I think I differ from many economists.
Yeah, well said. And it's more a bottom up than a top down growth path that I think you've taken, which means you've got your hands dirty in the trenches. You understand the nitty gritties, and then you've recognised the need to understand much broader concepts. What was it that jumping from being a real estate agent effectively into the economics world is quite a leap that I don't think would happen very often. What was it that attracted you to the world of economics in that context?
Yeah, so probably it was my dad was a bit of a casual real estate investor all through my childhood. So I spent a lot of weekends fixing up houses with him and arguing about, lifting and carrying and hammering and doing all those things. So I guess I was immersed in it from a young age, and I'd started an engineering degree and realized that engineering's kind of boring and there's just not easy money to be made when you first start out. So, and this was in the early 2000s, right? Just before property took off. It was taking off in Sydney, but just before it was taking off in Brisbane. And I just thought, there are people making a year's salary just trading houses. Maybe that's where the money is. So then I tried my hand at real estate and realized that actually, you want to be involved with development and investment more deeply, not the sales. And so that's sort of the path I took. And after a while, I went further into economics. I'd worked in a couple of property developers. I worked in the government, dealing with what were they called? Infrastructure charges and those sorts of policies.
Yep.
And it's a funny story because I was getting involved with economics and I was getting very frustrated. I'd worked in the government for a while after being in property development. We had our first child, got a sort of stable job, and I was really frustrated with it. So I decided I'd actually do medicine. And I said to my wife, I'd like to get up every day and do something useful for the world. and working in the government and dealing with policy arguments just wasn't cutting it.
Yep.
And so I did. I studied for the GAMSAT, the entrance test, and I aced it and I got accepted to medical school. But then I hosted Paul Freitas, who was a professor at UQ at the time, for an Economic Society event. And afterwards we stayed there drinking and I was like, yeah, economics is just nonsense. I'm going to go and do medicine. And by the end of the night, we decided that I could do a PhD in economics and do something useful and practical. And so I gave up my medical school spot and started a PhD in economics.
Well, that's a pretty pivotal conversation you had right there, clearly.
Yeah, it was. Well, I did a lot of research as well. I had a few doctor friends and I spoke to all of them, and one of them organized for me to go on an observership and follow them around at the hospital and see what it's like. And I spoke to the hospital careers person. So I did my research as well. And it was all pointing to, it's a pretty hard slog with young kids at home. I did the PhD and that result of that was the book Game of Mates about grey corruption. So I was very interested at the time in why in the government everything seems so politically sensitive rather than just getting on with the job. And so that was what I did in my PhD. And anyway, here we are years later.
Well, there's applying that Game of Mates exercise to the property arena has there's some ripple effects there that in terms of the mindset that have and do have an influence. While we're talking about it, can you expand a bit on that?
Yeah. So one of the interesting decisions in property is how we regulate property, right? And so in lots of areas of the economy, we regulate, what royalties do you pay when you mine? How do you get an approval? What are your obligations? And in property, we do this through the planning system quite often, as well as the building, codes. And there is a game to be had from getting the rules changed in your favor, just like there is in every sector. But I did recall from my time in property that a lot of the game is buy something that's going to get upzoned because that's essentially an extra property right for you that you didn't have to buy. And so one of the research studies I did was looking in Queensland in the 2000s. A new body was created, the Urban Land Development Authority, that had the power to take planning controls away from the councils and fast track and upzone and do whatever it did. And the shapes of these areas that they took control of were very unusual. And I thought that's kind of weird to draw it that way. So it's a little bit like gerrymandering for political electorates, but for upzoning areas. And so I got the property records from all the property owners inside and outside those areas, the ones just outside who could have been upzoned but weren't, and the ones inside. And I thought, can I predict who got the upzoning from, for example, political donations or their social network? And after scraping all the corporate records and a database of former politicians and the lobbyist register and the donations register, I came up with a sort of social network of 12,000 entities and 250,000 relationships. And it turned out that you could fairly easily predict where that boundary of that upzoning was drawn between whose properties based on where the property owner was in the social network, so how well connected they were. And what was super interesting is that these same metrics of centrality, they're called, like how well connected you are,
Yep.
can predict in organized criminal gangs who earns the most from being a gang member. So their wealth in the criminal gang is proportional to their centrality in the social network. And it was true in Queensland that well-connected property owners always got inside the rezoning decision, never left just outside. They were all the unconnected owners. And we found that the value of those sites with the boundaries drawn around them went up in value $710 million in the first year based on property sales records. So, that was sort of a big interest of mine is, well, we kind of need planning regulations, but planners seem oblivious to the fact that what they're doing is handing out hundreds of millions of dollars to different property owners willy-nilly with every decision. And I've been on a bit of a program of training planners to understand the economics of what they're doing. Sometimes they make development infeasible. Sometimes they give away valuable upzoning, right? And so I've been actually recently doing courses for the Planning Institute on property economics, trying to build that knowledge because it's a huge point of contention in the day-to-day administration, but also politically, it's a hot topic because the favors can be very valuable.
Yeah, beautifully said. I find it really interesting. I spent 17 odd years as an architect, and one of my biggest frustrations, Cameron, was having major decisions made on properties and the shape, appearance, and otherwise of properties at much more micro level than what you were talking. But they were influenced by the local fish and chip shop owner who was best mates with someone else. And it was very much about who you knew, not what you knew, to get the sort of. And that was part of the reason why I left architecture, actually, because the common sense and the right aspect was being overshadowed by the relationship aspect, but very much along what you're talking about there with the concept of centrality. And I think it's wherever there's people and there's relationships, it's going to be very difficult, I think, to legislate or to try and control that, because that's just human nature. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that was sort of the conclusion I got to at the end, is that you can't regulate human nature. What you can do is accept human nature how it is. And to be honest, there's a flip side to this social relationship. It builds a lot of trust. It's very efficiency enhancing to trust those people in your well-connected network, because when you cut a deal with them, you don't spend years in the courts afterwards trying to enforce it, because you all work with the same people for years afterwards. You've got to trust them.
Yep.
So there's a massive benefit to it. But of course, politically, you can use that trust to move the hand of government in the favor of certain people as well. So that's sort of a cost on everybody else as well. So I guess my conclusion was, we can't change people, but what we can have is institutions that price political decisions. Yep. So that if you give a favor, someone still has to pay for it if it's got a market value. And we can randomize decision-making or decision makers, so that even if you trust people, you don't know who's making the next decision. And those people making the decision don't have any loyalty because they just got randomly put there once. And we do this in criminal courts with juries. We randomly select the ultimate decision makers, because we know if we had professional juries, that eventually they'd be seduced into organized crime and everyone would get away with their crimes. So we know it works. We have good examples of where we do it when it's important, but we miss those key insights in day-to-day regulatory decisions. We sometimes think rotating staff, for example, from private sector into the regulator is a good idea because it gets this experience. But the flip side of that is it brings those social networks and those social obligations with it as well. Right. So this is why, for example, your judges in criminal courts don't just rotate in and out of private sector legal jobs because you've got to sort of insulate those decision makers. So I think there's a lot of lessons there we can apply in many other areas. And it's not about changing people, because there's a very good side to trust. It's just about having systems that work really well when people trust each other. And
Yeah, that's
we
brilliant.
randomize or we price things. Yeah,
that's pretty exciting, and we'll talk more about that in part two of our conversation, because I think in terms of future solutions, there's a lot of merit in exactly what you're saying there that has applicability in that aspect. One thing I'm sort of picking up from what you've shared with us already is that there's a lean towards the analytical efficiency is the best word term I can use to describe it, in terms of where your preferences tend to lead.
yeah.
Am I reading that right? And if that is so, if that's one of your sort of almost core values and beliefs, if you like, how does that continue to influence who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I think you've probably picked up a good insight there, Bushy. I would say economics training makes people acutely aware of inefficiencies of resource use, and everybody's frustrated by paperwork and middle management and terrible rules, but economists are trained to be even more frustrated. And I think I'm naturally a little bit like that, and I think most people are at the end of the day. Most people just want to do the job. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to tick forms or jump hoops. And we often regulate for the lowest common denominator in these things. So I think your experience in architecture was, well, what if we get an ugly building? Okay, well, you might get some ugly ones and you might get some amazing ones. Is it okay to just have a mix? And I think, yeah, probably it is, because the gain from just the simplicity or the efficiency from not having all those fights and ending up with a mix is probably worth it. But I think you're right. In my personal life, I'm very, very similar. I would say, as a young guy, cheapskate wouldn't have been too far from the mark. I think a lot of young guys, when they're working hard for their money, are very efficient and analytical with their money. And I think only, it sort of took till I had kids to loosen up on that and go, we only live once. It's great to be efficient and save and, not waste your time and work all the time, but, also there's the life to live as well. And so these days, what I try and do is I compress the work time. So when I work, it's really hard, focused, and high value work. And when I don't, unfortunately, I often still think about work. So in the shower, at the beach, I get amazing, great ideas. But at least I'm, going to the gym, walking the dog on the beach, doing other things, and sort of trying to keep the balance. So I think most people appreciate efficiency, and for economists, it's a much bigger and more important thing. For economists, the only reason we're rich is because we got more efficient, right? And probably one of the biggest topics in economics is why poor countries are poor. Why aren't they all rich? Why don't they catch up?
Yeah.
And the question is, well, do they have rules that don't let them? Are they constrained by international capital flows? Can they not get finance? Are there political, grey corruption that is undermining actual capital investment? These are the huge questions economists have. So I think I'm just a small part of that. But I definitely probably live that philosophy as well personally. Economists are renowned for never buying fancy cars.
Yeah.
Because we are very aware of buy a cheap secondhand Toyota and drive it into the ground. That is the most efficient outcome. And we do all our research. Now, I've got a cheap secondhand Mitsubishi, but I'm very close to the mark.
I love it. I love it. In that context, and the perception of economists, which I've sort of alluded to in the introduction, what do you find that most people misunderstand about you most?
Me personally or economics?
Yeah, no, you personally. Because all of us have a tendency to put people in a box. So if you mention the word economist, there's a perception that immediately comes to mind. How does that sit in the context of misunderstanding you and what you're about?
Yeah, it's a bit hard for me to know at the moment because I've lived this lifestyle for such a long time and I'm so entrenched. But the biggest confusion is that economists are not accountants. So we use money as a measure for well-being so when we say we want a bigger GDP, we don't want it because we want more dollars in bank accounts. We want it because high GDP means living a long time, higher education, better health outcomes, higher happiness, self-reported happiness correlates. So all the good things you want in life. It's not about the accounts, even though hilariously I was the treasurer for sport climbing Queensland, the Queensland competition climbing, and they're like, "Don't worry, he's an economist." I'm like, "But I'm not an accountant. It's it's a different thing." So that's probably the main confusion, and I guess the other one is it's all about finance and investment. Like I don't know what stocks are good or what's going, but I understand the big conceptual frameworks around risk and around the substitution of different assets and around the macroeconomy.
Yep.
And so I'm really, I'm torn with economics personally. Sometimes I think it's terrible. Sometimes I think we won't update our textbooks and we won't incorporate better views. And then sometimes I think it's great because at least we have a common language and can communicate with each other, where in a lot of other social sciences, it's just a word salad of no one's really sure what anyone means, and it's almost entertainment. So that's where I sit. Bit of a love-hate thing at times, and I think people don't. I have pretty broad interests, so I don't think they get me too wrong. I've generally can find common ground with people in my economic interests.
Well, certainly from a personal perspective, I can connect with having followed you for a while and listened to your observations. That there's a broader understanding I find in what you're sharing than what I see with some others. But and you've touched on this already. But what do you struggle with then, Cameron?
Time management, switching off. I would say because I'm so analytical all the time. You can probably should interview my wife after this. But just interpersonal, just letting things slide, and that's definitely something I'm aware of and at least trying to change. But it's a skill to just be deep in the economics. And just this morning I was walking and I just had on my mind this simulation exercise I want to code up, and all I can think of is, oh God, when can I get a few hours free to sit at the computer and check this? Whereas it's nearly Christmas, so I should probably reach out to some friends, shouldn't I? So that is just it's good. Again, I'm going to be the two-handed economist. It's great for focus and it's great for ideas and it's great for communication, but that is the flip side, is managing it and managing yourself. So in terms of economics, in terms of research, in terms of what's happening, that's all good, but it's really the juggle that and I think I've accepted that life goes in waves. So you have periods where it's really intense work, and then you need to switch off for a period. And I think I understand it intellectually. I just have to live it more, for sure.
Well, and I'm the reason why I'm smiling and laughing quietly on the inside is I'm resonating with absolutely everything you just said. I have this almost obsessive. Once an idea is in the head, I can't let it go. And yes, while intellectually I understand the need for balance, and there's this constant talk about balance. I maybe I'm getting old and crusty, but I don't know that is achievable or sustainable, depending on your mindset and your outlook. And because when you're doing the walk on the beach or what have, that's often when some of my best ideas come. I'm in the shower and I've got this inspiration and I've got to sit down and I've got to get it down as quick as I can before I lose the thread. So I think,
Yeah.
there's while we know that we need to be doing more balance, as the word. I'm not sure whether that works, and it's probably more surrounding yourself with people who understand you and how you operate that can accommodate that than trying to completely change who you are. And I guess that's a good segue into something else I want to ask you, Cameron, is, what challenging event in your life has brought about your greatest learnings and your best changes?
Good question. Greatest challenges. Yeah, probably probably having kids was so we were young, had unplanned first pregnancy, and both studying, and just in terms of perspective, it's very useful. I used to take our first son and take him to uni and put him on the floor on his playmat next to my computer. So I guess it was a bit of a shock and a challenge, and then it sort of forced me to grow up in terms of a level of maturity. So, as a young guy, nothing in life is too serious or important. It's easy to go and make some money, go on a trip here, do whatever you want. But this was a sort of step up in maturity, responsibility. In terms of managing money, it was all very, oh, actually, there's a reason now to be more cautious with the money. So I don't know if it was not a challenge in terms of, running a marathon or anything like that, where it's just you do it and you push yourself. It was more of a emotional maturity challenge for me. And I think most guys go through this. I have two sons and they're teenagers now, and you can see them going through that emotional learning as well, and it's very difficult. But I think for guys, it lasts another all through your 20s as well. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, if I look back at myself in my early 20s, I'd have a lot of words of wisdom for myself. So that's probably the big picture one that I can think of now.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. And I think guys generally, actually, while they won't admit it, have a real challenge with the responsibility for others. I'm probably talking more for myself here than anything else, because that's certainly something that I also struggled with many years ago now. But it's something that really flipped the lid for me in terms of what I was doing, where I was heading, and how I needed to actually respond, given that added responsibility for someone else's life, which I took seriously at the time. But you've touched on a couple of things, and again, it's there's an assumption around economists having their head around money and the relationship with money. What does money mean to you, Cameron?
Yeah, so money. It's funny. I know people who have household budgets and different, apps for saving and this and that. I don't have any of that. And my attitude is now, I guess when I was young and it was all about make money and invest and focus. Now it's, well, money is just there to be spent. That's what money is for. And I don't know if it's having kids that you realize the money, when you're single and you're young, money can just come in and you can hold it because you don't have many expenses. And then you've got a whole family and it's just a pipeline. It just flows straight through. And so my relationship now is, well, I'm going to spend everything I earn. So I'll just stop when there's no money left and wait for more money and then just keep going. Like, I don't know, as an economist, I guess people assume I've got this budget and I've got this. And yeah, I've got a bit of a long-term, we've bought our house and there's a long-term thing, and I've got super. So I'm an economist. I'm like, I don't have to buy shares. I've got super. Someone's doing it for me.
Yeah.
So my attitude now is it's just a money pipe. If we don't spend on something, we won't spend on something else.
Yeah.
And I guess my wife has probably forced me to realize that. She's like, well, you just want to spend on that. I just want to spend on that. We're just going to spend on something, right? And so that's my attitude now. I just earn money, it comes in one end, goes out the other. And as long as I've got a fairly mature view of what I value in life, so I think that's probably something that takes a while to learn. People
Yeah, and
think,
what
oh,
is that?
having the
Yeah, let's talk about that. What and it does change and evolve over time. So what do you value now, and how's that changed if you look back on your journey so far?
So, for example, when I was young, I wouldn't go out to a fancy restaurant, or I wouldn't even eat nice food because I'm like, it's just calories. Like, what difference does it make? I chew it for 20 seconds, it's gone. Um, and now I'm like, oh, actually, meals are this great social event where you hang out and you do all this stuff, and it's fun. And it doesn't matter if it costs a bit more money. It's actually, I enjoy the event of dining out and, chatting and trying the wine. And maybe that's, again, an age thing, but it's also just, I didn't value it because I thought it's like, when you're a teenager, you pre-drink before you go out for drinks because it's efficient. I would just pre-eat. I'm like, oh, spaghetti, good. Fill up the tank. Oh, we're gonna have something fancy. I'll just have a taste. So just appreciating things. I still don't value clothes and cars and stuff that a lot of people spend money on, but we do travel. So we took the kids skiing in Japan earlier this year. I really value like life events, big birthdays, weddings, all those big get-togethers and celebrations. So I those I value. We just got back from a week at the coast with my brother's family. We all shared a house, and so that's kind of, I think most people see that, but for me, the difference in value between that and buying a fancy car or fancy clothes is probably much more extreme. In fact, at my website, I have an article where I literally documented roughly what we spend on different categories of expenditure each year to match the ABS Consumer Price Index weights. So, for example, your typical house spends 12% on clothes and 8% on insurance or whatever the numbers are, and I compared our house to see how abnormal it was.
Yeah.
And ours is very, very high on entertainment and recreation and holidays, and kind of low on transport and clothing, as you can imagine.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is you're more about experience than things, and I think there's always an evolution with that. When I don't know about you, but I know when I was young, I needed to look successful, so it was all about the things that I could show that made me successful. If I roll through it to now, I couldn't. It's about more life and less stuff for me now. So there's been a massive shift in that, and the experiences that you've just shared with us are much more important to me than what they were then. So it sounds like we're similar there. I now want to sort of transition, if we can, Cameron, into your personal investment journey, because again, you've sort of alluded to it during the conversation, and I'd love you to take us through that, starting with, why did you decide to invest at all? What triggered your interest, and what were some of the initial fears and concerns that you might have had before you actually dove in?
Well, yeah, as I said, my dad was a bit of a keen investor, and so actually, when my dad was 50, he had throat cancer and decided that he needed to set us kids up for life financially. That was, one of his goals, and so he gave us $30,000 each and said, buy a house. That's what you need to do. And this was 2002, three sort of period.
Yep.
Luckily, just before the boom in Brisbane,
Yeah.
which is where I live.
Yep.
And well, at the time, it still seemed very expensive. But, went through the process of borrowing money and finding a mortgage broker and just learning the paperwork and administration that side of doing it. It's not just like, there is a process to it all, right? And that's what got me started. And conveniently, it was right before the Brisbane boom. Not that anyone knew that was coming. So I can't really take any credit for the timing there. But it turned out that it seemed like easy money because prices were just going up. So I tried to leverage and buy some more property and ended up in the early 2000s buying 3 houses and a block of land in very cheap places in Queensland. So Ipswich, Brisbane, Rockhampton, and I don't know if you know Russell Island, but a block of land on Russell Island was for $3,000.
Nice.
In the 2000s. They're only $40,000 now, by the way, if anyone wants to retire to a beautiful island, a short ferry ride from Brisbane.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I would have thought they would have been a lot more expensive than that. So I guess it's just the separation and the infrastructure challenge.
Well, I mean, a completed house is around 250,000 there. And so, yeah, it makes sense if you spend a couple $100,000 on a sort of cheap house. I want to get onto that in a moment because maybe when we talk about the policy debate around housing, people forget that there are cheap houses in this country. They're just not in Sydney.
Exactly.
So that was my sort of start of my investment journey. I did sell a couple of houses, and I don't know if I ever was too worried about it just because of the timing was good. And so I got a little bit bailed out with the capital gains early on.
Yeah.
Nothing happened, of course, between 2006 and 2019.
Yeah.
I could have sold everything in 2006 and had the same amount of cash as 2019 in Queensland. So we forget also that there wasn't a lot of price appreciation for more than a decade.
Yep.
And so that was sort of my introduction to it all. Obviously, at the time, I was working in real estate and property development, and so very entrenched in, where do you get value in the market? Why do things go up in value? Very much starting the thought processes on all those questions that I think I've got a very good handle on today. So I don't think I was ever too worried. My dad was super helpful, and he always made sure I had landlord's insurance because I didn't live in any of these places, which really helped. I had a place at Ipswich that I rented to an organisation that housed the children of people who were in jail. So I had carers, and they rented a bunch of houses where their carers would take the children. And it worked out really well for a few years until one of the kids started stealing the neighbors' cars and smashing up the house and pulling the fence palings off and starting bonfires. And the last straw was when they snuck away, leaving the bathtub filling, and no one turned the tap off, and the drain in the bathroom was covered by a mat. And so hours later, when they came home, the whole house had been flooded. And so I had to, I had all the experiences. I had to fix everything up, I had to chase the insurance company. They didn't want to pay. I had to have an argument, and all that's fine. And, I was made whole at the end and sold that place. But I don't think I was ever too worried because I think my dad was, had a bit of experience and was always double checking on me.
Is that a mentor in that context as well? But you probably
most definitely
you probably already summed this up. But if you look back on, and particularly on your property part of the journey, what's been your best and worst investment in that context, and what have you learned from each of those?
Look, probably the worst was that one, just because I should have sold it way earlier. Went through years of grief without actually making any extra money. The best one was probably the first one I bought when I was 19. in Brisbane that I just sold before COVID. Again, not great timing, right before the boom. But I sold it just before Christmas in 2019. But luckily in 2020, I bought the house we live in now. So during COVID, I was very like we were cashed up and ready to buy.
Yep.
During COVID, I was actually really worried. People thought prices were going to fall, and interest rates were already, I thought, pretty reasonable in 2019. You could get a 3-point-something% interest rate, and yields were still 5% in a lot of places.
Yeah.
And then they dropped even further. You get a 2-point-something in mortgage. And I just thought, there's nothing for sale. No one's panicking, and interest rates are low. How can prices go down?
Yeah.
And so I was really in a rush to buy something, and we did. But I remember I was on a podcast in May in 2020, right when the bank economist was saying, oh, prices might fall 30% nationally. And I said in that podcast, prices are more likely to rise 20% than fall 20% because of the low interest rates. And I said, if you look historically, high unemployment is not it doesn't correlate with falling house prices. It's just not a thing. Why are people saying it is just look at the record.
Yeah.
And people said to me, where did you get your degree? The back of a cornflakes packet, all this sort of stuff, right? And of course, 12 months later, all those guys that got it wrong were now explaining why prices went up. And so luckily I didn't wait too long, cashing out at the low in 2019 before getting back in. So yeah, I guess that's my story. I don't think there are any super terrible things, and I guess that's perspective, right? I think when you first start investing in property, a lot of people expect miracles very quickly.
They expect linear. In my experience, they expect this linear curve. But if you actually, and you would have done more research on this than I have, but research that I've done would suggest, over the last 45 or 50 odd years that things tend to go on almost a sort of an S curve, but it varies by location. One precinct right next to another can be going through a completely different growth cycle than the others, and it's not unusual for property values to go flatline for 5 to 8 years or more, and then they have a spike in growth, and then they might even come back slightly before they then extend out. So I think you know the stats that 54% of first-time investors sell a property within the first 5 years, and I think that's about expectations as much as anything, because they have this they often buy when prices have just gone through their major spike. And then they see the values just flatline for a period when they're expecting this sort of linear year-on-year growth. It's just they're just thinking and looking at it the wrong way.
I agree. I think because I worked in real estate and I knew a lot of old guys who'd been in real estate, and they're always talking about the cycles picking up and the cycle this, and then in property development, everyone's aware of the cycle. You don't want to miss the cycle, right? You've got to be prepared for. I was not. I guess I learned that lesson fairly early. I didn't sort of have to learn it firsthand by losing a lot of money or anything like that. So that was very lucky.
Yeah. Shifting gears a little bit, Cameron, what does financial independence mean to you?
Yeah, so I guess that's been, how would I put it? That's been a sort of life objective, principle, philosophy of mine since I was young, since my dad got me investing, is, oh, wow, I can actually not have to have a 9-to-5 job. And if I lose it, I'm okay for a few months because I've got this asset buffer, I've got a line of credit, or, I can actually do what I want, not what pays. And so that's been really great for me, having that flexibility, being able to do a PhD. And now I guess I'm trying to make the most of that again and start my own sort of one-man think tank, Fresh Economic Thinking. The last 4 years I did work for the University of Sydney, which is great. But now I feel like I can do my own thing, and I can do that partly because of 20 years of investing in property, and not buying new cars all the time and things like that. So I think it's just a matter of, in life you can do things for money every day, or you can do things that you want every day and work out how to make money. And I think the second choice is a lot better, and that's what I've been trying to do as much as I can. But you can really only do that if you can manage your money, if your spending needs are low and you can invest and you can have a savings buffer that allows you to live that better life. So when they get up in the morning, you're not just, I've got to put my alarm on and drag myself out and work for the man and deal with stupid meetings or whatever every day. Everyone's got those frustrations, but you want to minimize them, and having the freedom to do it. I think it's 2023, right? We should have as many people as we can doing the things they want and they enjoy each day, and minimize the people just having to do things for money. And I think we're getting there. Like if you look historically, we're at the best point in history in terms of that. But I wanted to personally make sure I was doing it. And so I think it's been really good. And now that my kids are in high school, I do wonder how much education in this financial literacy, financial management, financial independence they get. It's an interesting one. I definitely know my kids are good at spending money, but I have really noticed my eldest has a job now, and he when he's earned the money, it's super valuable. When I give him the money, I'll just buy whatever. So I would like to pass it down, but I think it's a life lesson. And getting slightly off topic, I really think some people just never know what that is, to be financially independent, to be in a household that's more financially independent. But I really wish we could teach it more widely and have more people experience it. Doesn't mean you don't have to work. Doesn't mean you don't have to work hard, but you don't have to do things you don't like every day. You can work hard at things that sort of pique your interest. Even if you're a builder or a tradie, you start your own business, you try this, you do this, you become a specialist in that. Like, you still work hard, but you can sustain an interest.
And to have the autonomy, to have the freedom of time and choice, in terms of fulfillment that flows from those, and again, you'd know this way more than I would, but I know from my personal experience, when we hit financial independence, and suddenly I was working because I wanted to, not because I had to. The mental shift, you can't put a dollar value on that, to be honest, in terms of your outlook and enjoyment of life from that point. And I guess again, slightly leveraging off that. Can I get you to paint us a picture of your ideal lifestyle and life vision, and in association with that, what's your investment strategy to both attain and maintain that? It sounds like you're probably doing it already, but can you share that with us?
Yeah. So I guess in terms of overall principle or lifestyle, I think I'm living it in a way. Let me just go on a bit of a tangent here. When we talk about superannuation, we're all about save, and then boom, retire at 65 or 67. But I think the better lifestyle is to save, spend, do what you want, save, spend, do what you want, and have many mini retirement periods or career changes, or just do the things you want when you can physically enjoy them. And so I think that's sort of what I've done. I've worked in real estate, I've studied, we've had various different breaks, and I think the lifestyle I want is now the one I have, where I'm working for myself, and I'm flexible. I can go to the gym, I can take the dogs out, I can have a day off, I can catch up with my friends. But my mind still ticks over, and I can still have those periods of focus. So that's how it is. How do I do it? Well, yeah, I guess when I was studying my PhD, we did draw down on the mortgage for one of the investment properties for a couple of years. But to be honest, it's not so much. If you're earning a little bit, you're just topping up a little bit, and you've bought yourself a few years of doing what you want. And so now I've got no investment properties and a house that's nearly paid off. So paying off the house saves you a lot of money, and of course I can redraw out of that as a buffer as well. So that's, it's not complicated. It's really not that complicated. It's just you've got to, I guess, accumulate appreciating assets is and I've done that, and now it's the house and the super, and that's probably okay for now.
Well, you've used those assets as enablers for your lifestyle, which is and sort of coming back to your point around retirement, I'm right with you there. Because it's like an on-off switch, retirement. Whereas for me and my wife and I, we talk about rewirement, not retirement, because we're just transitioning and changing what we do in line with both our interests and our ability, which is a much more enjoyable way of life. And if you look at the stats on those who retire, it may have changed, but some years ago I looked at this. There was 3 out of 5 males were dead within 5 years of retirement because suddenly they've got no purpose in life. And I think the key here is if you're pursuing your interests and that gives you the purpose, and you're making helping others and the fulfillment that flows from that, then that's something you can do as long as your heart keeps beating. So
totally with you there. And I think even if you have a physical job when you're young, you can evolve into other things when you're older. I've got a good mate who's a builder, and he's thinking of what comes next, and whether he trains other people starting a different sort of business in the area where he's seen there's a bit of a market. So I think it's this, that's the way it should be, right? The whole idea of work for the man for 30 years and retire, or 40 years, it's sort of not how it happens. And I think I'm very satisfied that more and more people think this way, which is great. And I think we're a rich country at the richest point in history. It's probably a good thing to get from from that.
Absolutely. Well, I think that the thing that there's a misnomer, I think, that people who embed themselves in employment and almost convict themselves to lifetime employment, they think there's more safety and security in that. When if you actually look at the stats, given where the world's heading, what's happening, there's more safety and security in working for yourself and driving your own race than there is on the reliance on the paycheck from someone else, because that paycheck may well not be there next week. So I
think that's a cultural thing, right? People misunderstand the risk of working for someone else versus yourself, because someone else is working for themselves and they're paying you, so you've got the second chance on their business's income.
Exactly.
That is a large institutions, obviously, universities where I've worked, government departments and stuff, and very large companies are less risky, but it is still a risk. And these companies downsize and adjust on a whim with a new CEO and a new competitor. All of a sudden, your risk-free job is up in the air.
Spot on. So if we sort of bring this to a close, if we reflect back on your journey so far, if you were starting out again, what, if anything, would you invest in differently? And again, when I say investment, I'm not just talking about property. I'm talking about investing your time, your energy, your money, your interests. What, if anything, would you do differently?
Look, I'm an optimist, and I'm also very forgetful, as my friends will tell you. So for me, I'm just like, everything was great. I'm sure I learn from things and adjust. So maybe I'll consider it as maybe what would I try and pass down to my kids who are
Yeah.
starting
Yeah.
the journey very soon. And I think it's a very good question. I think I'd just pass on my same advice. My kids have had a similar experience fixing up houses with me when they were little, fixing up our house, understanding investing, talking openly with us about money. So I think they've had a good grounding. And yeah, I think I would say just start investing a little while your costs are low and work hard, find stuff you're interested in. I think what we've I chat to my wife and I chat to my family, my brothers and sisters about this, and I think, what advice do you give a teenager in 2023 who's about to finish high school and embark on the world? And I think it's probably don't stand still.
Yeah.
Be trying something, even if, because you're not going to learn if you like something or you don't, or what your interests are by doing nothing. Just start, participate, do it as best you can. And if you realize there's no future in it or no interest, then keep moving to the next thing. So that's probably the highest level advice I think I could give. In terms of money, I'll be on their back making sure they invest and they're not, borrowing money to buy a new sports car at age 19 or anything like that.
Yeah, no, great advice. That's the generational, your father speaking through you, and I had a very similar
Exactly.
experience. My father, I remember when I was at school, all my mates wanted cars, and I kept saying to mum and dad, Dad, can I get a car? And my dad would always say, son, you can have any car you like, just as soon as you saved up the money to buy it. And
Yeah.
that the discipline of having to do it yourself and the respect that you then give to the asset when you finally actually
Yeah.
get your hands on it because you appreciate it, which is the same advice I give my son, by the way. No
Yeah.
different, but the habits and the discipline that build up as a result of that, I think they're life skills that you just can't ignore. So I think that
Yeah.
that advice from generations that flows through
Yeah.
is the best possible advice.
I just don't think this that is sort of timeless, isn't it?
It
I
is.
don't think it would have been a problem 100 years ago. Try something, work hard at it, spend less than your own. Don't just waste your money on showboating things. Would have worked 100 years ago as well, for sure. And I think I'll give you a little bit of a positive insight there on the next generation, and maybe we'll talk more about the sort of media hype around, the next generation's useless at everything, which is, of course, as old as the hills. At my boys' school, everyone wants to start a business. They all want to, they're
Interesting.
reading business books.
Wow.
They want to be the next somebody, the next new thing. And I'm very much encouraging
Yeah.
them. And yeah, so there's very much this can-do attitude out there. It's
Right.
obviously not everywhere, but I just wanted to leave with this. If we're talking about the generational advice, that yeah, old advice is good, but don't worry, a lot of youngsters are going to go out and do it themselves anyway because they are motivated. And I think they've seen, they look up to guys like Elon Musk and they just think, well, he just started a business. I'm going to do that for whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
Love it.
so,
That's very encouraging, and I'm glad to hear that, because while, as you mentioned before, and I agree with you, I think the educational system needs to embed, a framework for how to manage money and how to
yeah,
invest on their
yeah,
piece, so that it actually takes the pressure off at the other end when super's not enough, and the welfare system through pensions, which aren't going to be there forever, needing to be the safety net. If we're putting the energy into the front end and giving them the skills, then we
yeah,
don't need that massive safety blanket at the end. So brilliantly said. I now want to switch into what I commonly and affectionately refer to as the ambush round, Cameron, where I get the old blindfold and cigarette and ask you the sort of fast forward questions that you get asked on every podcast. First of those, which feels like a bit left field, but it tells us a bit about you and your thoughts. What's your favourite song and why?
Look, I don't know if I have one favorite, but I'll tell you what I often return to as a favorite is Bohemian Rhapsody. And the reason is when I was younger, I just wanted to learn that song on the piano. It's got some really nice sections in it.
Oh,
and it took me years, and I did. And so now it's kind of my go-to thing. If I want to just play the piano and unwind, I'll play the first few parts until the I see a little silhouette of a man. When I get to that part, I kind of give up.
But I'm with you. I'm a closet pianist myself, Cameron, and Freddie Mercury was a very talented individual who came up with some sensational music during that real halcyon period for rock around the world. I think so. That's a classic. Slightly different subject. What superpower do you wish you had, and why?
Look, I think I'll just bring out my inner child and go for the Superman's flying power. Isn't it always, you just feel like one day, wouldn't it be great to just fly like that?
I look at birds every day and go, I wish I could do that. I've done that since I was knee high.
It's a close contest, but I'm just going to pick that one because I remember being little and thinking, gee, that's amazing. And probably I remember, pretending that you could do that.
I love it. I love it. If it's again a different topic altogether, if you could have coffee with anyone, either dead or alive, who would you choose and why?
I'd probably try and find someone in my family history. There is my grandfather on my mother's side did a lot of family history and found that we can trace our line back to King Henry VII or something, not the eighth. And so probably just out of curiosity, going back to that sort of era, to someone who I can look and go, wow, okay, eventually your bloodline creates me. There's heaps of others, but that's just one that comes to mind now.
Yeah, love it. My good father traced the family tree back, and it was really interesting. Yeah, we learned stuff that we never would have known, and some of my grandmother didn't like some of the history because she had this vision that we were sort of English purists and the aristocracy, where we're actually at the opposite end. But
no, it's never the case, is it? Everyone's a mix of everything. It gives you a bit of an appreciation for humanity as well, that you realize that probably, if you go up far enough, we're all cousins at the end of the day.
Exactly. Love that. This one, the last one's a bit of an interesting one. What would be the title of the book about you if your worst enemy wrote it?
My worst enemy, it'd be something like the disingenuous pretend leftist fake alt-right, something like that. So I get criticized from the left and the right on social media. So if you're on Twitter at Dr. Cameron Murray, Dr. Cameron Murray, and the left hates me because during COVID I thought, well, you know what, locking everyone down doesn't seem like a medical intervention, and we should look at the economic costs. And of course, people thought that meant we wanted to kill grannies, but the economics, as I said earlier, it's not about the money, it's about the thing that you get from being in a rich functioning society, and that thing is well-being, happiness, longevity, all those things. And so if it wasn't the case, we wouldn't have to go to work every day and we'd still be rich and still be happy, but that's not true.
Yeah.
So the left and right, I think, don't have any meaning, but people hate me for that. They call me the alt-right, and then the right thinks I'm a crazy lefty because I think we should have a public housing system and that it's okay for the government to do things. and build things. And we really like it when they do, right? When the government fixes up your street or there's a new thing going on in the city, everyone loves it. Yet people think I'm a crazy lefty communist for that. So that that would be the book.
Well, yeah, that's good because I guess again I agree with everything you just shared, but there's a propensity for people, particularly nowadays, given we're siloed on our social media platforms, to put people into boxes very quickly. And I'm not a big believer in boxes personally, because just because you have a view in one area doesn't make you that. It's if you've got a diverse view of the world, then but I guess the good thing is, Cameron, that does mean that people are sitting up and taking notice of what you've got to say, and that's a really good thing. So, sort of closing off this sort of personal journey section, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would like me to, and if so, what is it, and what would you have said?
Geez, that's a tough one. I don't know if anything's coming to mind right now. What would you have asked about the personal journey, and what would I have said? My head's super focused on property right now.
Yeah, and you've shared most of it anyway. I always sort of open just in case there's something you're bursting to share with us that I haven't got the opportunity.
Look, I might just tease the audience.
Yeah,
I might just tease the audience that you should have asked me, why do you think we should scrap the superannuation system and give everyone their money back? That's what probably.
Well,
so maybe I can not answer it and just leave it.
Okay. I tell you what. Let's sow the seed in this episode, and then we'll talk a little bit about the superannuation system in part 2 to put a bit more colour on it. So, look, mate, I'm really enjoying the conversation. I really want to thank you for taking the time to share the ins and outs of your journey so far. And I just want to mention to anyone watching or listening in, if you'd like to ask any further questions or leave your thoughts on our great chat so far, just join and jump into the Property Hub Collective interactive Facebook community, where you can keep the conversation going with other like-minded, hardworking Aussies. And we now look forward to continuing the conversation in next week's episode, where we're going to deep dive into the wonderful world of property and housing economics. So I look forward to seeing you again, and thanks for your time today, Cameron.
Stay tuned for part 2 of this interview next episode.
Thanks for tuning in to Get Invested on the Property Hub podcast channel, your home for property investment insights and inspiration. And don't leave yet until you've taken the next step towards living by design by getting my award-winning book, Get Invested, absolutely free when you sign up at knowhowproperty.com.au or bushymartin.com.au. And finally, make sure you subscribe to Property Hub to get your weekly dose of Get Invested inspiration, along with every episode of Realty Talk, Australia's leading property show for red-hot property investing news and insights, direct from industry leaders and influencers. Remember to always get invested in your knowledge, and I look forward to seeing you next time.